Hello everyone. Good morning and good evening. Let's start the meeting. Hello everyone. This is Velero committee meeting on February 1st. For the overall status, Beijing team has just started to come back from the holiday, and some members will be back next week. So the for V1.10.1, we have created the RT build before the holiday, and this week we will prepare the GA. And for V1.11, development items are basically on track. And for the built-in data moments, we have finished the first round discussion, and we have made agreements and on some key factors, and we will create another central discussion for the left open questions. From my side, I'm working on the follow-ups on the data moment discussion. Try to follow up the questions or concerns we have made during the discussion, and I also create a new version of the snapshot backup and snapshot restore CR. Hopefully it is more generic, and it is more generic, and we can discuss that on the next discussion. That's from my side. And Xin, please.
Two items. The second one is work on some 1.11 related issues. And the first one is still going on the design work of the separating namespace and the cluster resource filters. I saw Scott's comments and even also joined the meeting. Maybe we need to take some time to go through the proposals and the events proposals.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just a quick follow-up from my comments. I had some comments saying that at an earlier version of this design, we were suggesting that the include cluster or include namespace resources, that you would need to specify star to include them versus the default. And I think the last comment that you'd had was that we can exclude everything with the exclude star. And I think my only comment there was, with the current implementation, I don't believe the wildcards work properly with excludes, so we'll need to fix that as part of this is all. Because I think right now wildcards are only really functional on the include side, not the exclude side, with the existing code, not the new, obviously.
Yes, there's some modification after the discussion with Daniel. We think maybe make the include as the default behavior is for users to better understand how it works, and same with the existing parameters. And for your question to how to exclude resources, the change is to make the wildcard also work for the exclude.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense, because right now it only works on include, but if as long as the implementation of this includes making it work on the exclude side as well, I think that'll solve the same use case, and that'll be fine.
Okay. Then Evan, how about your?
I think like the only question, I mean, once again, thanks for all the pointers and feedbacks and link to the existing issues. I mean, like I took a look at all of them like prior to adding a comment, but I guess that's just too much information there. Again, thanks for the refresher. I think like my main like like questions or slash hesitation around it is like the deprecation of the existing like flags, especially like around include cluster resources, how like like users like just get used to like depending on that behavior where there's that auto direct inference of like oh, we're gonna go get the PV because the PVC is in your namespace, that type of behavior. So like I know like the I believe like the default if we do end up deprecating all the existing flags and
Yeah.
behavior.
I actually don't think we're going to deprecate the existing ones. I think that two are going to live side by side. Basically, you have to use one or the other, so you can't mix all 7. But basically, we'll have a validation that says you can either use the old flags or the new flags. So existing users that were happy with the old functionality, I think that I don't think we have to get rid of that. I mean, deprecation is obviously a future decision anyway, because we wouldn't deprecate it immediately. And I think there'd be some discussion about whether we might want to deprecate it or not. I don't think that's a closed discussion. I just was going to say one other thing about the auto include where you pull in, just the PVs for the PVCs. That was one of the changes that we'd made fairly late here as well. And basically for the cluster scope resources, if you list it in the include cluster resources, then we include all of that resource type. If you list it in the excludes, then we include 0 of that type. But any cluster scope resources that's not listed in either, then we follow the old auto behavior. But instead of being an all or nothing auto like it is now, so for example, you could list cluster roles as include cluster resources, and then you don't list PVs, so that's going to be the auto behavior of pulling in just the relevant ones. That's a use case that you can't handle with the old ones, where the only way to include all cluster roles would be to include all cluster scope resources, including all PVs, which we probably don't want to do for most cases.
Right. So basically, that it really boils down to like just modifying the include behavior to be more like I guess like additive addition kind of behavior instead of exclusively include what is on the list, right?
Yeah, it's this is an area where we're going to have to. I mean, the implementation is going to have clear documentation as part of it, because there's a distinction that there's the namespace resources, which works just like you would expect from the old behavior. You process the includes and then you subtract the excludes, and then that's your list. For cluster scoped resources, we actually have 3 categories. Anything in the includes explicitly, we include everything of those. Anything in the excludes, we completely exclude. And any resources that are not mentioned in either follows that default behavior like we see with the old parameters, where we include just relevant resources. So just the PVs for the PVCs, just the CRDs if there's a CR, that kind of thing.
Okay. So in the case of like, I believe like in last week meeting, we talked about like custom resource definitions being like that special thing. That
Yeah,
always
right. So
requires
if you only want to include the CRDs for the CRs you're backing up, then you would just not list custom resource definitions in the cluster resources list. But if you have a use case where you want to include all of them because you're backing up something and you need your CRDs because maybe they're temporary resources and so you don't have any to back up, then you would list custom resource definitions in the include list, and then that'll back up all the CRDs in the cluster.
Okay. So yeah, I think the main thing there is still like so that would like solve like our problem like 70-80% of the way. I think part of it is kind of going back to our previous discussion around like like I guess like from I don't want like basically like our users like they don't want to back up all the CRDs, right? It's like, okay, there's an operator in this
and that's where the question of adding some future mechanism of naming resources comes up, and I know there have been a couple of proposals around that, and that, which is I guess part of what you're talking about here, because right now Velero doesn't have anything like that. There's ways of including and excluding by type and namespace, and the label selector, which is kind of difficult to work with because and then that's why we've seen various proposals for I want some way of including resources by name, and I guess the challenge that we have to work through with any of those proposals is again, how do we do that in a way that's not confusing to the user in the way it interacts with the existing resource based and namespace based and all that, and if there's a way of doing that that we can come up with that kind of and I would think that would be in addition to this, because these use cases that we're kind of trying to solve here don't go away if we add the named, named resources, because I think there are valid cases that this solves that we need this for. But to your point, there are other cases where we want to say, hey, I want just this list of CRDs, whether or not we have resources, CCRs for them, and that's kind of would call for a named resource inclusion. So not just the type, but the type and the name and the namespace or whatever. And I think we've had some issues, and we've had some discussions around starting that. But again, that's another case that it's going to be like this one, where once we get into the details of a design, it's going to be pretty complicated. We're just going to have to work through all the edge cases and make sure the end result is easy for a user to work with.
Yeah, actually, you might remember, I think that's actually an existing issue around that, like the resource by name.
Yeah, I know. That was mentioned last week, and I think I'd even commented on that one last year when it came out as kind of initially, and then there hadn't been a lot of activity on that lately. So that might be an issue that's could be brought up again as something to think about. Again, I would say that would be something that I don't think we'd want to do it as part of this, but it would need to be consistent with this, and as another add-on kind of way of also include these things, or and figure out how to interact.
But Scott, so can that be disjoint? Like, can we design that along with this separately?
I think we can do it at the same time. I don't know that it necessarily needs. Maybe there's a case to be made to say, hey, it's easier to do one kind of grand unifying design here. That's easier to work with. It also might be easier to at least complete this design, get it merged, and then a follow-on PR that modifies this design, adds to it. I wonder that we already have so much in play with this design and all these changes back and forth. We've been working on this for a couple months now, that I think to throw a whole bunch of new scope into this, I think might kind of derail a bit of the work. I think I'd like to see this design merged, and then a follow-on design, maybe even that modifies this document, that kind of adds in the other use cases like that.
Yeah, I think I fully agree with you on that. I actually added a comment to that issue around the name filtering and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Definitely this proposal right here on the screen, by itself, is already pretty involved. I don't think we need to continue to expand the scope and make it even more. I think even the resource by name in itself would require some like you said deeper thoughts into how that was gonna affect the API and what kind of the semantics that would affect the user workflow and stuff like that.
But but I guess doing the implementation together makes sense, right? The design can follow one after the other.
Yeah, probably. Again, I think that probably depends on what design we come up with, but you're right. There's it might be easier to implement it as one big PR that does everything, and depending on how the designs interact, it might be easier to implement the PR in stages. I think that's a decision we can make after we have an approved design as to hey, do we want to implement this thing as one big chunk, or do we want to phase it in? From an API change point of view, one change in one release to get it all together makes sense, because then users only have to react to one change. Whether we get there incrementally within one release cycle, I think is a question we can figure out later. But I do think that since it's a related functionality change, we probably want to implement all of this in the same release cycle, so that we don't have to educate users on a new way of selecting items for backup twice.
Right. Hopefully not a PR with 2,000 lines of code change, right? So, yeah. I noticed as we pointed out, that issue has gone cold and stale. Is it okay if I reach out to you offline to see if I'm happy to take that on to help move that forward.
That makes sense. And I think a lot of times these issues go stale because someone in the community will submit an issue, and there's that active discussion back and forth, and then maybe the original reporter priorities changes no longer matters to them until they stop responding to the issue. And so since it wasn't something that upstream that we're in the maintainers or we're actively working on, if the person that submitted the issue had stopped responding, those issues kind of stop getting activity. So if you're interested in this now, it's kind of taking it on again, or to talk about it, I think commenting on that issue probably would be a good place to continue that discussion. And ultimately, once this design gets merged, it might make sense to have a design PR, linked to that issue, but actually possibly modifying this as document or an add-on document. I'm not sure. It probably depends on what direction we're going with the design as to what makes sense there.
Okay.
But even if it is a separate document, we just need to make sure that the use case is covered in terms of what kind of API changes we want. Handle all the use cases here, smoothly.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, yeah, I actually added a comment to the issue. Maybe like I'll reach out to you like offline to go into more detailed discussion there about that one.
Yeah, sure.
So yeah, I think like going back to Jean, going back to your earlier question, like I don't at this point like yeah, like I've my I guess like my only like I guess like ask of questions around this proposal right now is just like if we do end up like deciding to deprecate like or not, if we do decide to deprecate like flags like include like cluster resources and stuff like that, just maybe like want to be clear about like how that deprecation process is going to be like. Probably may take slightly more than 2 releases because like user has grown so like dependent on that kind of thing.
We actually had a design PR to discuss the deprecation process, because one of the issues is that at this point, I don't think we actually have that process designed explicitly. But like you said, part of the idea here is that when and we need to finalize that process in the governance just to make sure that we're going to stick with it. But I think the intent is exactly that. So at some future release, we say, okay, in 1.12, for example, we deprecate the old parameters. That means that 1.13 is still going to be there, and probably 1.14 depending on what we define there. But there's a defined number of releases that it will still be available. The deprecation is the first step to removal. It doesn't get removed for at least another release, if not 2 after that, and that's the part that we need to be clear on.
Yeah, and part of that also like just like coming up with an upgrade path for the user, right? I mean, like it could be as simple as just changing the flag on the CRD.
Exactly.
But part of it is like what about at the API level, right? Like meanwhile, like what does that transition look like? And
I think too, and this is not so much a process question, but just a kind of specific to this particular issue. I think it makes sense to release them side by side and get feedback from users to say, hey, do the new parameters meet your needs? Are there still users that need the old ones? Let's have that discussion before we deprecate anything, to make sure that if we are planning on deprecating, we find a way that to meet their needs.
Yep. So yeah, okay. So so like whatever the flags and options gonna look like, I guess at this point, like it really doesn't matter. I think what this proposal have already is really good. I think that will help out us and like other users as well. Just like I guess like a attack on follow-up questions is like regarding like, hey, I'm backing up the scenarios of I'm backing up a namespace scope resources plus in addition I want this whole bunch of cluster scope resources. What does I am just curious, like what does the restore generally look like? Like what if like especially around CRD, right? You know how like sometimes they have like v1 alpha 1 in one backup, and then there's a v1 beta 1 in another backup, and then during restore, like I guess would they just end up like stepping on each other's toes? Like how like the cluster scope resources, they're gonna affect the entire cluster, right? And then it's up to the user to know, oh yeah, in this backup, taken 2 days ago, my CRD is v1 beta 1, the other one is v1 alpha 1. I better not roll back to the older one during restore.
Right, and now do keep in mind that the default behavior from restore is that Velero, if the resource exists already in the cluster, it's not going to override it. If so, Velero only restores things that don't exist in the cluster by default. If that object is there already, then there'll be a warning on the restore saying the resource was already in the cluster. There is an option to get Velero to try to patch resources on restore, but that's not the default. So in the case of the CRDs, if you back up all the CRDs and then you restore them all to the cluster, the ones that are already defined in your cluster that you're restoring to will not get overwritten. It's only going to create the CRDs that aren't already there.
But there are a lot of others, right? Like cluster scope resources that will get over, which have been deleted, would get restored, which user doesn't want. So just what to give background, right? For our product, right? Customers backup at namespace level, that is the unit of protection.
Yep.
And they want all the applications, the namespace to be protected, but then there are some dependencies at the cluster scope, right, resources.
Right.
So they have to be backed up, which is more or less solved with that nil option, default or auto option. But this is the use case now where our applications, there is that implicit dependency is not there. And that's where customers are saying this is a gap, data loss, and
so that's the case where you're saying that, you know, we want the named resource inclusion.
Named
So
one, right?
so we'll include this specific cluster scope resource with this name, not just everything of that type.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I think that was kind of one of the things that we'd identified, you know, and that's why we had that other issue. Then it's the someone had issue entered before, where, you know, being able to identify specific named resources is certainly something that, you know, a number of users have asked for. And, you know, the fact that there's an existing issue is kind of, you know, related to that. And I think there is a need to pursue that, to design that. You know, so that's what I was suggesting, that, you know, that can be a follow-on design PR that kind of expands this as needed, you know, with, you know, to handle those use cases. We just have to make sure that we do it in a way that's, you know, understandable to the end users.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds good. Okay, yeah, why don't we do that then? I'll just you know, reach out to you offline and like continue to comment on the other issues, and then we can see like what's the next step for that particular feature. Meanwhile, like once again, yeah, this proposal here on the screen looks great. Thanks for all the hard work. I think that's all for me.
Thanks, Evan. Anyway, my part is done.
Okay, thanks. Let's move on. And Wenkai, please.
Yeah, I'm working on 11 issue. I'm trying to add the detailed resource list when user run the Velero resource describe dash detail command. Just we did for the Velero backup describe command. After the work is done, you'll see a detailed resource list in the describe command for the resource. Yeah, this is from my side.
Okay, thanks. Scott, please.
Okay, so yeah, I've been working on the async plugin work, kind of the controller side in terms of on the backup side. I don't have a PR yet, but I've been kind of putting that together. I'm hoping to get a PR by the end of the week. You know, at least a draft PR if it's not ready for review yet. There.
Okay, thanks. And Shiva.
I just had one PR raised regarding updation of CRD descriptions. This is with regards to the recent change we made, wherein snapshot volumes and restored PVs are not just for cloud providers, but also cater to CSI snapshots. That's the PR. Yeah. That's it.
Okay, thanks. We will review the PR offline. And for the discussion topics, I just have a little query that for the second round, the discussion on the built-in data mover, what about the time next week? Like the same time of the same time with the community Chinese community meeting next Wednesday or next Thursday. Is the time okay for you, Siobhan, Scott?
Yeah, works for me.
Yeah, I would say the Wednesday time works better for me than the Thursday time, but either could work.
Okay, so better Wednesday. Okay, that's I will check with the other members for the time, and hopefully we will we'll have the meeting next week. Yes. That's from my side. Any other discussion topics? If not, I think we can finish off the meeting here. Thanks for joining. Have a good day and evening. Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everybody.
See you
Cheers.
all.